The slap echoed through the silent first-class cabin, shocking every passenger into stunned disbelief. Commander Simone Carter slowly raised her badge, not a weapon, revealing her true identity to the very people who had humiliated her. In that moment, power shifted, and a career built on unchecked privilege began to crumble before a captive audience. Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport pulsed with its usual early morning urgency, the polished floors reflecting a river of determined travelers dragging rolling suitcases and clutching coffee cups. Among them, Commander Simone Carter moved with deliberate calm, blending in seamlessly in jeans, sneakers, and a soft black blazer. Her badge, the gleaming symbol of 22 years of public service, lay hidden deep inside the inner pocket of her carry-on. Today, she was just Simone, not Deputy Chief Carter, heading to Chicago for the National Law Enforcement Leadership Summit, a rare trip without her uniform, without expectation, without the weight of her title. She had deliberately chosen anonymity, craving one day without protocol or salute. She smiled to herself as she checked her phone again, confirmation of her seat in first class, a reward from years of platinum travel status, flashing proudly in her travel app. She had earned it. Across the terminal, Captain Erica Whitmore adjusted the gleaming wings on her pressed Navy uniform, her sharp gaze sweeping the crowd. Beside her, Gate Agent Chloe Sanders awaited boarding instructions, her headset slightly askew, her bright red lipstick set in a tight smile. They shared an unspoken language, a certain understanding about who belonged in first class and who didn't. As Simone neared the TSA checkpoint, the morning crowd parted like a tide, and the blue-shirt security agent's hand shot up. "Random screening," he barked, already reaching toward Simone's meticulously packed carry-on. Simone blinked once, deeply familiar with this script. Around her, white businessmen in tailored suits and elderly couples breezed through the checkpoint with casual nods and absent-minded waves. She said nothing, offering her bag with a calmness only years of practice could maintain. The gloved agent rifled through her belongings with unnecessary force, jostling her laptop, pulling open her toiletry case, rummaging like he was certain to find contraband hidden between her conference folders and family pictures. Simone said nothing. She watched. She recorded every unnecessary tug, every pointed look, every whispered comment that died on lips when her calm gaze met theirs. Cleared, without apology, she reassembled her scattered belongings with quiet precision and moved toward Gate 12 where Sunrise Airlines Flight 2201 prepared to board. As Simone approached the gate, Chloe Sanders looked up from her station. Her eyes skimmed over Simone's boarding pass, lingering not on the printed confirmation of her first-class seat, but on Simone herself, assessing, judging. "Economy doesn't start boarding for another 30 minutes, Chloe announced loudly, ensuring the nearby cluster of travelers turned to look. Simone simply extended her boarding pass, the platinum stripe shining clearly. Chloe's eyes narrowed. She snatched the pass with theatrical skepticism, holding it to the light, flipping it back and forth as if deciphering a counterfeit bill. The electronic reader beeped a cheerful confirmation, first class, seat 2A, but Chloe wasn't satisfied. She pressed a series of buttons on her keyboard, frowning exaggeratedly, drawing more unwanted attention toward Simone. "Something's not right here," she said, loud enough for the growing audience to hear. Simone remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. Years of de-escalation training whispered reminders in her mind: don't react, don't engage, don't give them the excuse they're hunting for. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Simone asked, her voice steady, low, professional. No defensive edge, no anger, just a simple question. Chloe opened her mouth to respond, but another voice sliced through the air before she could. "What's going on here?" Captain Erica Whitmore strode toward the gate, radiating command. She barely glanced at the cluster of boarding passengers. Her focus was entirely on Simone. "This lady's claiming first class," Chloe said, thrusting the boarding pass at the captain like evidence of a crime. Captain Whitmore plucked the pass from Chloe's hand, examining it with a frown. "How did you obtain this ticket?" she asked Simone, voice clipped, distrustful. "I purchased it," Simone replied smoothly. 3 weeks ago. Platinum member. Captain Whitmore's lips tightened, her eyes scanning Simone from head to toe. Without another word, she turned to Chloe. Verify her payment method. Thoroughly. Chloe nodded, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Simone remained silent, feeling the stares from the other passengers, feeling the atmosphere thicken with suspicion. The same old story unfolding yet again in a place that prided itself on moving people but too often moved judgment faster than facts. After a painfully long minute, Chloe's screen flashed green. Verified. Paid. Platinum. First class. Still, Chloe hesitated, looking toward Captain Whitmore, who gave the slightest nod of approval, an unspoken instruction to proceed with further humiliation. You can board, Chloe said, her voice grudging. Simone accepted her boarding pass without comment. Her hand steady. Her heart slower than normal. Her dignity intact. She stepped toward the jet bridge. That's when it happened. Captain Whitmore, standing just beside the gate, reached for Simone's carry-on, yanking it out of her hand with unnecessary force. The zipper gave way under the assault, and Simone's carefully folded conference documents, a gift-wrapped snow globe for her daughter, and her toiletry case tumbled across the floor. A collective gasp rose from the watching passengers. What are you hiding in here? Captain Whitmore demanded, kicking the toiletry bag aside with the toe of her polished shoe. Simone knelt calmly, gathering her belongings without a word. She felt the eyes on her, felt the heat of embarrassment trying to rise in her cheeks, but she pushed it down with the steely control that had carried her through crime scenes, community protests, and too many funerals. Please don't touch my personal items, Simone said quietly but firmly, securing her bag once again. Captain Whitmore said nothing, only watched her with a sneer barely hidden under professional decorum. Chloe crossed her arms, clearly dissatisfied that the situation hadn't produced the angry outburst they seemed to expect, and perhaps need. Simone stood tall, adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder, and walked onto the jet bridge, head high, heart heavy. The corridor seemed endless, a narrowing tunnel leading her into the next battleground, but Simone kept moving. 22 years in law enforcement had taught her that injustice often wore a smile and a badge, that prejudice could be dressed in a tailored uniform and a pair of polished shoes. But it also taught her something more important. The most dangerous weapon in any confrontation wasn't anger or pride, it was calm. As she approached the aircraft door, she felt the weight of Captain Whitmore's stare burning into her back, a promise that this was not the end of the confrontation, only the beginning. Simone inhaled deeply once, twice, steadying herself as she crossed the threshold into the plane. She would not let them define her. Not today. Not ever. The soft thud of Simone's sneakers against the aircraft floor sounded louder than it should have, each step toward her seat carrying the residue of what had just unfolded at the gate, but she kept her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even, her focus ahead. She found seat 2A, a window seat tucked neatly into the front row of first class, and stored her slightly battered carry-on beneath the seat in front of her instead of placing it overhead, instinctively keeping it close after the earlier violation. The snow globe for her daughter, mercifully unbroken, remained wrapped carefully in a scarf deep inside her bag. Around her, the first-class cabin buzzed with the low hum of pre-departure preparations. Flight attendant Tina Reynolds moved briskly down the aisle, her polished appearance and clipped smile betraying nothing to the untrained eye, but to Simone, who had spent 2 decades reading microexpressions and body language under pressure, the tension was palpable. Tina's gaze slid over Simone as if she didn't exist, her service tray lingering warmly at seats 1C and 1D where 2 white businessmen were offered orange juice and coffee with casual familiarity. Simone watched without comment as Tina skipped 2A entirely, moving to 2B and greeting the middle-aged man in a gray suit like an old friend, bending slightly at the waist, her tone bright and welcoming. Simone shifted slightly in her seat, giving Tina the benefit of the doubt once, telling herself perhaps it was a simple oversight. But then came the second pass, hot towels distributed with efficient grace to every seat, except hers. Simone watched as the warm cloths were handed out, her own hands resting quietly on her lap, the slight damp scent of eucalyptus teasing the air around her but denied to her seat, her presence deliberately erased from the first-class service choreography. She pressed the call button discreetly overhead, a universal signal no passenger needed to explain. Within seconds, Tina Reynolds appeared, not at her seat, but at the panel near the galley, reaching up and deactivating the call button without so much as a glance toward Simone, turning back to her duties with the mechanical indifference of someone who had done this before. Simone folded her hands neatly on her lap, her mind recording each slight with forensic precision. She wasn't surprised. She had seen this before, countless times, subtle discrimination wrapped in the professional trappings of customer service, weaponized invisibility inflicted through selective neglect. 5 minutes later, Tina returned with a drink cart, distributing beverages. "Excuse me," Simone said calmly as Tina passed without offering anything. "May I please have a bottle of water?" Tina didn't break stride, didn't turn, didn't even acknowledge the request. She continued pouring scotch into 2B's glass with a practiced hand, the ice clinking gently, the message unmistakable. Simone inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower, steadying herself with the kind of restraint that had been drilled into her during years of field operations and internal affairs interviews. She caught the eye of the businessman in 2B, who frowned slightly, his gaze shifting between Simone's composed face and Tina's obvious avoidance. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice polite but firm as he addressed Tina. "The lady next to me has asked for water. Could you please get it for her?" Tina's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll get to her when I can," she said, her tone making clear that one was indefinite. Simone made a mental note of the witness, 2B, and returned her attention to the cabin around her. Other passengers were watching now, some openly, some furtively, but the pattern was becoming too obvious to ignore. Captain Erica Whitmore appeared then at the front of the cabin, her polished shoes clicking softly against the carpeted aisle as she moved slowly past each row, inspecting passengers under the guise of a routine safety check. Simone stiffened slightly, instincts prickling. In all her years of frequent flying, she had never once seen a captain perform a cabin walkthrough before departure, much less in first class. Captain Whitmore's gaze swept across the cabin before locking onto Simone's face with the focus of a hunter spotting a target. She approached 2A with a deliberate slowness, stopping just beside Simone's seat, her hands clasped neatly behind her back, the picture of manufactured professionalism. "There must be some mistake," she announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear, her voice laced with full concern. The statement wasn't directed at Simone but floated into the cabin like a bad smell, inviting assumptions, suspicions. Simone didn't rise to the bait. "There's no mistake," she said evenly, holding up her boarding pass. "This is my assigned seat." Captain Whitmore's smile didn't reach her eyes. "People like you don't belong in first class on my aircraft," she said, her voice a scalpel carving through the already thin veneer of civility. The cabin stilled. The white noise of boarding fell away, replaced by a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls of the plane. A woman in 1B gasped audibly. The businessman in 2B shifted uncomfortably. A couple in 3A exchanged wide-eyed glances. Simone's heart pounded once, hard, but her face remained calm. She tilted her head slightly. "What exactly do you mean by people like me?" she asked, her voice still measured, trapping Captain Whitmore in a question with no good answer. Captain Whitmore's face tightened. "You know exactly what I mean," she said, doubling down without hesitation. "You're out of place here." The words landed with the weight of centuries, the ugly, ancient belief about who belonged where and who didn't, about invisible lines drawn by power and protected by uniformed authority. Simone reached for her phone, her fingers moving with calm deliberation. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't standing. She wasn't doing anything but documenting, preserving evidence that could not later be twisted or erased. But the moment the screen lit up, Tina Reynolds materialized as if summoned, stepping into the aisle with sudden urgency. "No recording during safety checks," she barked, reaching to block Simone's phone with her body. The choreography between captain and attendant was flawless, practiced, seamless. Yet it was too late. Other passengers had already begun recording from their own seats, 1D, 3A, 4B. Simone saw the glints of smartphone lenses catching the unfolding scene. Captain Whitmore's posture stiffened as she realized control was slipping. "You're being disruptive," she snapped, jabbing a finger dangerously close to Simone's face. The businessman in 2B interjected sharply. "She's sitting quietly. She hasn't done anything wrong." Captain Whitmore's head whipped around, her authority openly challenged by a passenger she would normally expect deference from. "Stay out of this," she snarled, her composure fraying. "She's creating a hostile environment." Simone sat still, hands visible on her armrests, voice calm. "The only hostility is coming from you and your staff," she said, her words clear, deliberate, undeniable. Captain Whitmore's face darkened. Her hand shot toward her lapel microphone. "Security to first class," she barked into it. "We have a disruptive passenger." The words echoed ominously through the cabin, twisting reality into a fiction designed to justify escalation. Within moments, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane, their expressions worried but professional. They scanned the cabin quickly, noting Simone's calm posture, the recording passengers, the hostile captain hovering like a storm cloud. "Remove her immediately," Captain Whitmore demanded, pointing at Simone. "She threatened my crew." Simone raised her hand slowly, palms outward, the universal gesture of peace. "I have done nothing wrong," she said, voice steady. "This is racial profiling." Captain Whitmore scoffed loudly. "There she goes, playing the race card," she sneered, the contempt dripping from every syllable. The security officers hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Simone reached, slowly, deliberately, toward the inner pocket of her blazer. "Perhaps my identification will clarify," she said, her movement unhurried, telegraphed, non-threatening. Captain Whitmore's reaction was immediate and shocking. With a sudden burst of violence, she slapped Simone hard across the face, the sharp crack echoing through the stunned cabin. "She's reaching for a weapon," the captain screamed, her voice shrill with panic, or was it guilt? For a frozen moment, time seemed suspended, the entire cabin locked in collective disbelief. Simone completed the motion, her hand emerging not with a weapon, but with a badge. A gold shield glinting under the cabin lights, instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever worked with law enforcement. She held it up, her face calm, her cheek stinging but her spirit unbowed. The badge spoke for itself, Deputy Chief of the Atlanta Police Department. The security officers snapped to attention instinctively, the recognition flooding their faces. The passengers recording from every angle leaned forward, their disbelief giving way to stunned vindication. Captain Whitmore's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, her authority evaporating faster than a puddle under a desert sun. The senior security officer unclipped his radio and spoke with crisp finality. "I need backup and arrest support at Gate 12. Captain Erica Whitmore is being detained for assaulting Deputy Chief Simone Carter." In a single moment, the world turned upside down. The aggressor unmasked. The power dynamic reversed. Justice, long delayed, often denied, began its slow, unstoppable march down the aisle of Flight 2201. Captain Erica Whitmore stood frozen in the first-class aisle, her hand still hovering uselessly in the air where moments before it had delivered a slap heard around the cabin, her face drained of all color as security officers approached with professional calm, their expressions tight with the realization that their duty now required them to act against the very authority figures they were trained to defer to, and without a word, Officer Ramirez reached for his cuffs, the metallic clink. Snapping the stunned cabin back to life, passengers craning their necks, phones recording openly now as Captain Whitmore was guided firmly toward the front of the plane, her wrists secured behind her back. The woman who had minutes earlier commanded the flight now reduced to a stumbling figure stripped of her authority. Commander Simone Carter sat motionless in 2A, her cheeks still burning but her posture composed, the badge in her hand still gleaming under the cabin lights, an undeniable emblem of who she was and how catastrophically wrong Captain Whitmore had been. The senior security officer leaned down slightly, speaking quietly but urgently. "Deputy Chief Carter, are you injured?" Simone shook her head once, a small gesture, her voice measured. "I'm fine, but I will be filing a full report," she said, her words carrying the weight of someone who had spent her career turning chaos into accountability. Outside the aircraft door, a crowd was already gathering, alerted by whispers and texts. And when the captain was escorted down the jet bridge in handcuffs, a ripple of disbelief spread through the terminal, cell phones lifted high to capture the fall of someone who had assumed her uniform would protect her forever. Across the airport, the Sunrise Airlines Operations Center exploded into action, emergency alerts flashing across monitors. Executives summoned from early meetings to crisis calls. The CEO of Sunrise Airlines, Raymond Gallagher, stared grimly at his screen where the first raw videos were already circulating on social media, hashtags multiplying by the second, hashtag traveling while black, hashtag justice for Simone, hashtag accountability in the air. Gallagher jabbed his phone, barking into the line for his general counsel, "Get me a plan in the next 10 minutes or don't bother coming back." On board Flight 2201, gate agent Chloe Sanders and flight attendant Tina Reynolds were pulled aside by two grim-faced supervisors, their IDs confiscated, their employment terminated on the spot. No hearings, no second chances, not in the face of undeniable video evidence playing on every passenger's phone, not when the reputation of the airline itself was disintegrating by the minute. Commander Carter remained seated, quietly gathering her belongings as the replacement captain and full substitute crew boarded, the airline scrambling to salvage what they could of the flight, but the damage was done. Irreparable, irreversible, as she stepped off the plane surrounded by respectful officers. Simone's entrance into the terminal was met with a barrage of flashes, the media having descended within minutes, reporters shouting questions, passengers applauding spontaneously, not because they knew every detail, but because they recognized the courage it took for a black woman to remain composed under systemic abuse and still stand tall when the truth was revealed. At the airport security office, Captain Whitmore was booked, her mugshot capturing the stunned disbelief of a woman encountering true accountability for the first time in her career. The photo would flood news outlets before noon, her professional headshot juxtaposed brutally beside her booking photo. The symbolism inescapable. Chloe Sanders and Tina Reynolds were similarly processed, their dismissals formalized in internal memos leaked within hours. Sunrise Airlines issued a public statement of apology signed by Gallagher himself, the language carefully crafted by panicked lawyers but hollow to anyone who had witnessed the raw truth of what had unfolded. Deputy Chief Simone Carter, however, was not interested in apologies, she was interested in systemic change. Flanked by her legal team and a growing group of civil rights attorneys, she filed an official federal discrimination complaint within 24 hours. The paperwork, accompanied by over a dozen passenger witness statements and hours of video evidence. Across the nation, the incident exploded into a cultural reckoning. Talk shows, morning news, editorial columns all dissected the abuse of authority, the insidious nature of systemic bias even in the skies. Hashtag traveling while black trended #1 globally for 3 consecutive days, shared alongside stories from thousands of travelers who recounted their own experiences of being profiled, humiliated, dismissed. The airline stock plummeted by 12% in a single afternoon. Sunrise Airlines Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting resulting in a public commitment to sweeping reforms, blind ticketing systems that hid passenger names and photos during seat assignments, mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, independent oversight committees to investigate discrimination claims, an anonymous passenger reporting system activated via QR codes printed on every boarding pass. Sunrise Airlines wasn't just trying to repair their image, they were fighting for their survival. Gallagher reached out personally to Simone Carter, requesting a private meeting. It was granted, but on Simone's terms, high above downtown Atlanta in a glass-walled conference room. Gallagher extended a formal apology, offered financial settlements, but Simone had already decided. Her conditions were clear, a $50 million settlement not just for herself but as a class action on behalf of every passenger who had faced discrimination, binding agreements to implement the reforms she demanded, and her full authority to review and audit the airline's compliance for the next 5 years. Gallagher agreed without argument, knowing refusal would mean public obliteration. As the settlement was announced, cheers erupted across social media, not because money had changed hands, but because for once, real tangible accountability was being enforced. In federal court 6 months later, Captain Erica Whitmore stood before Judge Elena Robbins, her once proud shoulders hunched, her navy suit hanging loosely from a frame visibly diminished. The court heard the charges: assault, filing false security claims, endangering a federal transportation system. In the end, Whitmore accepted a plea deal, 6 months probation, 300 hours of mandatory community service in underserved communities, permanent revocation of her pilot's license, and a lifetime ban from any safety-sensitive transportation role. As Judge Robbins pronounced the sentence, she spoke words that echoed beyond the walls of the courtroom. No title, no uniform, no position of perceived authority places you above the law. Today we affirm that accountability is not optional, it is essential. Chloe Sanders and Tina Reynolds faced their own civil penalties and were blacklisted from major airline employment databases. A powerful message sent rippling through the travel industry, but perhaps the most lasting change unfolded not inside courtrooms but across airports nationwide. Policies Simone Carter had championed were adopted not only by Sunrise Airlines but by 4 major carriers within a year. Racial profiling. Complaints dropped dramatically as blind boarding procedures and transparency reforms reshaped the traveler experience, and at the national summit Simone had originally traveled to attend, she delivered the keynote address, not as a cautionary tale, but as a leader, a reformer, a voice unwilling to accept quiet injustice. Dressed in full uniform, the stars on her shoulders gleaming under the stage lights, she told a room full of the nation's highest-ranking law enforcement and aviation officials, authority demands accountability. Power without justice is nothing but abuse. In the audience, rows of diverse faces, young officers, future airline leaders, newly minted civil rights attorneys, listened, took notes, and carried her words into their own spheres of influence. At home, Simone's teenage daughter, Maya Carter, completed her first solo flight at the local Aeronautics Academy. A proud tradition of black excellence in aviation continuing, not despite the obstacles, but because of the ones that had been overcome. Maya told her instructors with a confident smile, "My mom taught me you don't run from injustice, you fly straight through it and clear a path for everyone coming after you." As the world watched Flight 2201's fallout ripple through policy and culture, the story of Simone Carter reminded a nation that justice delayed is not justice denied. That dignity can withstand even the highest altitudes of prejudice, and that sometimes the most powerful revolution begins quietly, with one woman refusing to be invisible. Injustice often wears a polished uniform. It speaks with authority, cloaks itself in procedures, and expects silence from those it targets. But today's story reminds us of an enduring truth: no badge, no rank, no title ever grants the right to demean another human being. Commander Simone Carter's experience aboard Flight 2201 was not an isolated incident, it was a reflection of a deeper, systemic problem. What made the difference was not just who she was, but how she chose to respond. In the face of humiliation, she chose composure over outrage. In the face of aggression, she chose to stand firm, not with fists, but with facts, with quiet courage, and with unwavering dignity. The lesson we carry forward from Simone's story is simple but powerful. True strength lies not in dominance, but in restraint. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves slowly, deliberately, through documentation, through witness, through standing your ground even when it would be easier to walk away. When confronted by bias, prejudice, or unfairness, we each face a choice: to stay silent and allow injustice to grow unnoticed, or to speak truth with calm, to act with integrity, and to demand better from the systems that serve us all. For those of us who travel, who work, who live in spaces not always designed for our full dignity, this story is a beacon. It reminds us that change comes not when we accept injustice as inevitable, but when we hold institutions accountable, relentlessly, insistently, and above all, together. It also reminds those in positions of authority, your power is not a shield, it is a trust. When you betray that trust, the consequences will, and must, come. At U.S. Justice Stories, we are honored to share voices like Simone Carter's, voices that don't just endure injustice but transform it into a force for real, lasting change. We believe in a future where dignity isn't conditional, where fairness isn't selective, and where silence is no longer mistaken for acceptance. Thank you for standing with us, for listening, for reflecting, and for believing that justice is not just a word, it's a daily choice. If today's story moved you, inspired you, or opened your eyes a little wider, we invite you to share it, to carry its lesson forward into your conversations, your communities, your workplaces. Together, we are part of a movement, not just to tell stories, but to shape a better future. Thank you for being here with us. We can't wait to share the next story with you.